James Carter walked into that courtroom looking like the world had already chewed him up and spit him out, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes tired, and his spirit weighed down by years of being pushed aside. The people in the seats whispered as he passed, some shaking their heads, others smirking, because to them he looked like just another poor man about to get crushed by a system that never had room for him in the first place. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses, leaned back in his chair, and stared down at James like he was dirt stuck to his shoe. "Mr. Carter," he said, dripping sarcasm, "is this really the best you could manage? You stand in my courtroom unprepared, unpolished, and clearly out of your depth." The audience chuckled softly, and James swallowed, steadying his breath. He raised his voice with as much confidence as he could gather. "Your Honor, I just need a chance to present." But the judge cut him off before he could finish. "Present what?" Another excuse? Another fabricated story from someone who can't even afford a decent suit? Save this court's time. James lowered his eyes for a moment, not in shame but in calculation, because every insult, every condescending smirk was fuel, and he'd spent too long being underestimated to let one more man, especially this one, break him. He lifted his gaze again, this time steady. "Your Honor, I have evidence." The judge laughed under his breath. "Evidence? From you." The murmurs grew louder. People shook their heads. They had already written James off. But James wasn't here for their approval. He reached slowly into his jacket. Holloway raised a brow, annoyed and bored. That annoyance froze the moment he saw the metallic shine. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as James placed a badge on the table. "Special Agent James Carter, FBI," he said calmly, and the entire room went dead silent. Holloway leaned forward, eyes wide and lips trembling. "You're an agent?" James nodded. "I was undercover. For months. Your courtroom wasn't just a place I was forced into. It was the center of an investigation." The judge's face drained of all color. The man who a moment ago felt untouchable now looked like he was suffocating under the weight of his own arrogance. James pulled out a thick file and slid it toward the bench. "In that folder are records of every legal ruling, every bribe, every time you targeted the poor because you thought no one would question you." The room erupted in whispers, the tone shifting from mockery to shock. "You abuse your power," James continued, his voice steady, "and you counted on men like me staying silent. But I don't stay silent. Not anymore." Holloway tried to gather himself, tried to cling to the scraps of authority that were slipping through his fingers. This is nonsense. You have no right to." "I have every right." James cut in. "And the Department of Justice will be here shortly. They're reviewing everything as we speak." The judge's lips trembled. The man who had mocked James just minutes earlier now sat frozen, powerless, and exposed before the very people he once intimidated. James picked up his badge and slipped it back into his pocket. He looked at Holloway with a calm, quiet confidence, not triumphant, not vengeful, just resolute. "Here's something you should remember," he said. "Never judge a man by what you think he is. Judge him by what he's capable of becoming." The courtroom absorbed his words like a blow to the chest. James turned and walked out as every eye in the room followed him, some in awe, some in disbelief, all of them realizing they had just witnessed a giant fall. Outside, he stepped into the dim alley behind the courthouse. Before he could take 2 steps, his phone buzzed. He answered. A low, distorted voice spoke on the other end. "Agent Carter, Holloway was just the first domino. The others know what he did today, and they're not happy." James froze, his grip tightening around the phone, his eyes darting to the shadows, shifting along the walls. The voice continued, colder this time. "They're coming for you. Get ready." The line went dead. James slowly lifted his head, the wind cutting through the silence as faint footsteps echoed behind him. And just before the screen fades to black, James whispers, "Then let them come." James didn't turn around right away. Those footsteps behind him echoed too softly to be a threat, and too confidently to be a stranger. He clenched his jaw, tightened his fist, and kept listening. Every instinct from his years in the bureau screamed danger, but he kept walking until he reached the corner of the alley. Only then did he stop, inhale slowly, and speak without looking back. "If you're here to scare me," he said quietly, You're already late. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a familiar voice broke through the tension. Funny, the man said. I was about to say the same thing to you. James spun around. Standing across the alley was Marcus Tate, former agent, former partner, and the last man James ever expected to see again. Marcus had disappeared 2 years earlier after being accused of selling intel to a criminal network. James had been one of the few who believed he was framed. But now Marcus stood there, alive, calm, wearing a trench coat and a look that mixed apology with urgency. James, he said, lifting his hand slowly, if you're seeing me, then they're already 3 steps ahead. James stared at him, stunned, struggling to process the impossible reunion. You vanished, James said. No trace. No message. Nothing. Marcus nodded. And if I hadn't, you'd be in a body bag. I had to disappear, brother. James shook his head, his voice colder now. You were the only one who knew about the Holloway investigation. Marcus let out a slow breath. I know, and that's why I'm here. He reached into his coat, not fast, not aggressive, just slow enough to show he wasn't pulling a weapon. From inside, he pulled out a small encrypted drive. There's a list, Marcus said, stepping closer. Holloway was one name. There are 7 more. Judges, CEOs, officers, politicians, all connected, all protected. James took the drive but didn't take his eyes off Marcus. Why bring this to me? Marcus half smiled, half winced. Because they already know you're coming. And because you're the only one left who hasn't been compromised. James sighed and slipped the drive into his pocket. Before he could speak, Marcus added, There's more. One of those names is someone you trust. James froze. Give me a name. Marcus shook his head. I can't, not here. That's why we need to move. They'll triangulate our location any minute. As if on cue, a black SUV suddenly turned into a narrow alley. Headlights blinding, engine roaring. James and Marcus immediately ran in opposite directions, instinct kicking in. The SUV accelerated toward James. Tires screeched. A door flew open. A masked man leaned out with a taser baton crackling in his hand. James leaped over a trash bin, narrowly avoiding the lunge, rolling across the wet pavement before jumping back to his feet. Marcus shouted from the other side of the alley, James, go to the old train depot. His voice cut off. James turned just in time to see 2 more men grab Marcus and shove him into the SUV. Marcus. James sprinted forward, but the vehicle reversed so fast it skidded, almost hitting the brick wall. The masked man slammed the door and yelled, Move, move, move. The SUV shot forward, windows tinted, tires screaming against the pavement as it disappeared into the darkness with Marcus inside. James stood in the alley, chest heaving, fists trembling. Another car alarm went off in the distance. Sirens somewhere in the city wailed like the whole world was warning him. He pulled out the encrypted drive, gripping it tight enough to crack the casing. Someone he trusted, someone close, was part of this. Okay, James whispered, breath shaking but steady. You want a war? You got one. But before he could move, his phone buzzed again. No caller ID. Against his better judgment, he answered. A distorted voice, different from before, spoke calmly, almost chillingly polite. Agent Carter, we have Marcus. If you want him alive, bring us a drive. James stiffened. If you hurt him, the voice cut in unbothered. You'll receive instructions soon. Do not contact the Bureau. Do not involve anyone. And James, check your apartment. The line went dead. James lowered the phone slowly. Check your apartment. His stomach tightened. If they'd been there, if they had searched it, if they had left something, he took 1 step forward before realizing something even worse. The voice said, your apartment, not your home, which meant they knew he didn't live where the Bureau thought he did. They knew his real address, his hidden address, and that meant they knew everything. James turned toward the city lights, gripping the drive in one hand, his phone in the other, his mind racing as the weight of the threat closed in around him. Something was waiting for him at his apartment. Something meant to warn him, or break him, or threaten someone he cared about. He began to run. But when he reached the street, when he finally looked up toward the skyline, he froze. Because from where he was standing, he could see it, his apartment window, glowing red from the inside.